Just for everyone that is listening, have you ever struggled with a secret, perhaps a sin? You thought no one would find out, but someone did. That was what happened to our next guest's marriage. But before we proceed, please be advised that the nature of this discussion might be heavy or difficult for some. And if you need help, support or counsel, please call Premier Lifeline on 0300 111 0101. And that's open on weekdays from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. So Jo Hewlett and her husband Jez Carey, a deeply moving story of redemption, restoration, and the quiet miracles God works within a marriage. More than a decade ago, pornography entered their marriage, and Jo and Jez walked through a season marked by secrecy, shattered trust, and emotional confusion. Out of that painful journey emerged Hope After, a ministry where Jo and Jez now speak gently and truthfully. Jo joins me to share her testimony of how God redeemed her marriage and home from the influence of pornography and the fresh hope that they have in God's redemptive love. Jo.
Lovely, thank you.
Was that intro all right?
I think that was spot on. I don't need to say anything else now.
Just call it a day and just go and have breakfast.
Yeah. Well, you're right. It isn't something I thought 10 years ago that I'd ever be speaking about publicly. But yeah, what if we've, walked through this and can help another couple feel less alone or perhaps more grounded or able to take the next step forward, then holding on to what is this secret taboo thing, it just doesn't make sense. So it is a taboo topic though, isn't it? Particularly in Christian spaces. And I think sometimes couples and churches don't often know how to navigate it when it appears in a marriage, because it's incredibly difficult for the man, who's often carrying a great deal of shame and guilt. And yet when you look at scripture, it's actually very clear that shame isn't what God holds over us. It's equally difficult for the woman. She's left feeling that she was somehow not enough, because that's how I felt, certainly. And no one really made me feel like that. I think the trouble with pornography and marriage is it doesn't stay contained. It changes how someone thinks, how they relate, and how they see intimacy, and ultimately how safe the marriage feels for the woman, and why the words "I've stopped" aren't the end of the story for either individual, let alone the marriage itself.
And we're gonna unpack that a little bit later on, particularly around like shame and everything else. But I guess I just wanted to start by just wanting to hear about your upbringing. Like what shaped your spiritual or emotional life as a child? What were the things that shaped you?
Well, I had my upbringing wasn't in a Christian family. So Jez and we didn't become Christians until about a year before our marriage. So my upbringing, I had a lovely family, but childhood was complex for me. So I'd had a number of unhealthy relationships before meeting Jez. So when I did meet Jez, and he seemed to tick every box, I thought I'd found somebody really wonderful. And yes, he is really wonderful, but I didn't know that he was bringing with him an addiction into the marriage. And Jez's upbringing, he had also quite a complicated upbringing, where he was exposed to pornography at a very young age, and he didn't have a father growing up, and perhaps there wasn't that support in place.
What were there any like values or lessons you grew up with that later became important in your marriage or in your ministry?
Well, for me, trust and honesty is really important. So I entered my marriage with trust being. I think we all enter our marriages with trust being quite high up there on the list of priorities. So when pornography entered our marriage over a decade ago, it really fractured something. It genuinely felt like the rug had been pulled from under my feet. And for me, it wasn't just about what happened, it was what it did to my sense of reality. Because although I had this uh, this belief that, our marriage is on trust. It has everything has to revolve around, loving one another, putting the other person first. I don't think I'd really got a firm foundation of who I was with God, who my identity was. And that came a lot later after the rupture, really, because the marriage I thought I was in suddenly didn't feel like the marriage I was actually living in. And when the ground moves from under your feet like that, the support system hadn't been in place. It wasn't in place enough for me. And that, because that can feel really terrifying. When the rug is pulled from under your feet in that way, it what was hiding and what it did to my sense of safety, which perhaps wasn't secure enough in my faith at that time. And it kind of grew as my faith grew very much through this process.
Right. You said that you was drawn to Jez because he basically ticked every box. How did you both meet?
So Jez was my builder, and I fell in love with him.
I love that.
Yeah, it wasn't very well. It was romantic, but
That sounds like the that should be like a Netflix show or something, isn't it? Like,
yeah. Oh dear.
oh, nice. And what were like the early years of your relationship like?
So early years, absolutely fine. We had a really lovely relationship. And I think that was the struggle because Jez brought this into the marriage. I had absolutely no idea. So everything was great in our marriage. We got on well, we laughed together, we enjoyed life together, relationships worked perfectly, everything was fine. And we got married, had children. And yeah, I had absolutely no idea. I came across it accidentally. I was looking through our shared Google search history for something I'd previously closed, and I saw explicit searches. I'd never checked the history before, so I was completely shocked when I saw them. And at first, I thought it must be a mistake, and then I realized it wasn't.
Mm. Can you share what that moment was like for you
Yeah.
emotionally?
Yeah, so I remember the progression of emotion so clearly. So I felt this shock and I felt then sick and hurt. Then came lots of anger. And I remember firing up prayers like, please don't let this be real, God. Please don't let this be what I think it is. And I think what often gets missed is that this isn't just like hurt feelings. What develops is this deep emotional and psychological impacts that therapists they call betrayal trauma, but I didn't know anything about that back then. What I did know though was that I would have to confront him.
Because many couples experience that shock and confusion and loss of trust in like similar situations.
Mm.
Outside of just the immediate emotions, were there any like questions that you wrestled with at the time?
Well, before this, like I say, I had absolutely no idea, but I did know at this stage that I was going to have to confront him. So, but before I could say anything to him, um, I needed to be certain of what I was seeing, and I looked again at the evidence in front of me, and what I found. What I found, Tash, was I couldn't stop looking at the screen and looking at the women that he'd chosen to spend time with instead of me. Um, and unfortunately, because I saw the search terms, that meant I could picture the images in my mind. And I think this is what happens to women a lot in this situation. And I could even visit the sites that he'd been looking at. And I became obsessed with the details, scanning through everything. And I think in that frantic moment, that's what women do. And I hoped, because I had no idea that there was anything wrong, I hoped it might be just a one off. But as I kept looking, I could see that it had been going on for a long time, as far back as the history would allow me to see. And what I noticed was how appealing the whole thing was, how it was presented and laid out, and how many options there were for, to choose from. It was so easy to click on something and then the next thing and then the next thing. And there were options I'd never even heard of. And much of it just didn't reflect anything about our marriage or our intimacy.
Yeah.
What made that more confusing was what I believed we had a really good relationship. Like I said, I had absolutely no idea, not a clue, because you're right to sort of say, did you notice anything? And some women, they do sense that something is off. They come to us with, their husband is perhaps emotionally distant or less present, or they can sense that something shifted in their marriage. But I didn't have that. And that was probably because Jez had brought it in to the marriage from before we met. It was something that had been part of his life for a very long time. So when I did confront him, he initially denied it. And that might sound really strange given the evidence, but it's really not uncommon. Most men in this situation, they do either deny or minimize by saying things like, oh, it's only pornography, or my friends' wives don't mind them looking at it. But very shortly after I confronted him, he broke down, and through tears, he explained that he had a porn addiction.
Wow. I can imagine that just due to the shame and the fear of it all, that's probably why I guess men that tend to be in that position often deny it straight away.
Yeah.
I guess that's across the board with any sort of like secret or thing that you're hiding, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it is. But for when he said that he had a porn addiction, I mean, I'd heard of like gambling or alcohol, but I think when he told me, even though he was crying, I think I may have laughed. And I was like, what do you mean, a porn addiction? I didn't even know that it was a thing. And he said quite clearly, Joe, I don't want to look, but I can't stop. And I couldn't understand that at all. It took me such a long time. How could you not want something that you're actively searching for? I could see that he was actively searching for it regularly. And it took me a very long time to understand that addiction, it's very different from casual use. Not that casual use doesn't damage a marriage, it can, but this was something deeper because it involved long-term secrecy, and that secrecy, that secret act, that's what hurts the marriage. And I think that's often missing from, also what's missing from the conversation about pornography. When I found it made me realize that it's not just images on a screen, but behind it is a whole industry, and much of that industry is built on exploitation and coercion and people who perhaps aren't as free as they appear. So it's not just a private issue inside a marriage, it connects to something much wider, which I think is important to acknowledge. But back to the immediate aftermath, one of my first thoughts, which is the same thing for women again and again, is this must be happening because I'm not enough. I'm not attractive enough, or I'm not sexual enough, or not giving him enough. And what I didn't realize was that if porn were simply about finding a better woman, then men with loving, beautiful, and sexually available wives would all be immune, and they're not. So I just want to just quickly say this to any woman listening, that if you've had a discovery and it's made you question your worth, that is injury speaking, and it's not the truth. And what you're feeling is it's not insecurity, it's the injury. There is a difference, and that difference matters. You weren't They didn't choose porn over you, but I didn't know that back then. So I did something many women do at that stage. Shall I continue with what I did?
Mm. If you've just tuned in, we are listening to Daytime on Premier Christian Radio. The time is 24 minutes past 10, and we're currently in conversation with Jo Hewlett, and she's sharing a deeply honest and moving story of her marriage and how brokenness and restoration fit into that space after the impact of pornography. We're going to continue with the conversation right after this. Welcome back. You are listening to Daytime on Premier Christian Radio with me, Tash Kusi, and the time is 29 minutes past 10. We are currently in conversation with Jo Hewlett, and she is sharing about the her journey, her marriage, the story of redemption, of distrust, and how the impact of pornography had affected her marriage. And we're going to continue with that conversation now.
Thanks, Tash. Yeah, so I did what many women do after they first discover that their husband's been looking at this kind of material, and it is embarrassing. But I started making myself more sexually available because part of me believed that if I could somehow fill whatever gap I imagined porn had filled, then perhaps it would just stop and it wouldn't happen again. But it didn't heal anything. It left me more disconnected from myself, made me feel worse. And I really wouldn't recommend that response to anyone in this situation because it doesn't solve anything. What I didn't understand then is it's not something you fix by trying harder or becoming more, because real change, as we know, actually comes from something much deeper, from being made new, not just behaving differently. But after that, shortly came, more emotions, more anger, confusion, fear, disgust, and comparison. I did feel completely broken, and I thought our sexual relationship was just between us, but to discover he was choosing to spend his time and energy elsewhere, it really hurt me deeply. And I couldn't have him near me, but I also didn't want him far away. I didn't really know what to do with myself. So I did what many women and men they do in times of panic. After prayer, I Googled it. I Googled porn addiction just to see if that would help. So, and I quickly realized then that other men were also struggling with this too. And that was 10 years ago, Tash. So imagine now how common it is nowadays. So I moved into problem solving mode. I thought, right, if he wants to stop, he says he wants to stop, I'm going to find the solution. And there wasn't a great deal out there, but he was willing to try whatever was necessary. And we believe that there must be a quick fix for something like this out there somewhere. And the church, I think, often feels the same: pray harder, stop looking, and that should be enough. And I think it just really isn't that simple, because stopping a behavior isn't the same as transformation. There is a process of putting off old patterns and learning something new, but that takes time and support. And we did try many things.
If you're just tuned in, just wanted to advise that the nature of this discussion might be heavy or difficult for some, and if you need help or support or some form of counsel, you can call the Premier Lifeline on 0300 111 0101. Jo, you mentioned about, there's a few things you mentioned there, particularly around church and the approach, pray harder.
Yeah.
And then things will change. Could you talk more about that? Because that I've heard that before.
Yeah. Well, I think that is the message that has been from the church for a long time. And I do think that needs addressing. But prayer, willingness, those things are essential. But it requires a lot of deeper work as well, a lot of support for both the husband and the wife, for the person with the addiction and the person who feels that they've been betrayed. And I think when it comes to issues that involve, I kind of want to say mental health issues, that prayer has to be the first thing. And the foundation with Christianity was so important to us as we move through this. But there wasn't much help from the church. And I think now that is changing. I think churches are starting to talk about it a little bit more from the front, but maybe that support isn't really there behind. Um, I think the message is still to the husband, just stop and repent. And to the wife, make yourself more available in the bedroom. Unfortunately, that is still happening. That is the message that is coming through. But we're hoping that this might bridge that a little bit more. But there are things that, we tried um, early on because there wasn't kind of like a set pattern or anything that we followed, but we certainly tried things, including a period of abstinence from all sexual behavior to reset the brain. And it's something that's really important in addressing the addiction because it affects the neurochemistry. And we tried this reset with much hope that it would like fix him and that our marriage would return to what it was before. But while all this was happening and I was supporting Jez through this reset program, I was still broken. I was still trying to be this supportive wife, but I was in deep pain emotionally. What I now understand as betrayal trauma was unfolding. The person I trusted for safety had become a source of pain and confusion. It was like, who's this man? And was any of our marriage real? And at the same time, Jez was dealing with shame and guilt and his own internal conflict because he loved me. He didn't want to see me hurt. And he saw how much it was affecting me. And he believed that prayer and willpower would be enough to stop. And it does for a while. Willpower can work really well when things are intense and safety needs to be proven to the woman. But what we didn't understand at the time was that addiction recovery, it requires deeper work spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and actually physically. For example, you have to trace it back. When did it start? What patterns are driving it? And like I said, Jezza carried this from childhood, which is often the case with most men. But at the time, we didn't know how to address that. We just thought a kind of 90-day reset, a bit of willpower and prayer would fix everything, that he'd stop using and I'd stop hurting. But it didn't. It seemed like nothing was really improving very fast inside. And eventually, I started putting in some boundaries, hoping that that next step would solve everything and make the pain go away.
Before you talk about boundaries, you mentioned about rebuilding safety.
Mm, yeah.
How did you navigate the gap between like change and trust during that period?
Well, that's what we didn't do is we didn't navigate the gap. We didn't know how to do that. We didn't know how to rebuild that emotional intimacy between the fracture and then forgiveness and then rebuilding trust. We didn't know how to do that. And that is something that we've stumbled through this recovery and that we've been able to kind of I suppose off the back of those mistakes and what it actually does require to rebuild trust, because it's incredibly hard, is it kind of needs to be done in a staged progress and not rushed. It takes time and consistency and predictability. But that only happens when initially there are boundaries in place. So for the woman to feel that safety and that ability to rebuild trust, boundaries and accountability, internet controls, and support programs, these are all things that men have to kind of agree to. Because, and I always say this, that if privacy is protected more fiercely than integrity, recovery is going to stall. It won't move forward. So the boundaries, they gave me room to breathe and I needed space to begin my own healing. So the boundaries, the accountability program, all that, they're crucial in recovery. They help stabilize things for a while, but they didn't heal the deeper issues like rebuilding trust and what had happened to my identity. And another key shift was I had to stop being his manager. I couldn't be his accountability partner. I didn't want to hear how good he was doing while I was feeling so rubbish. I couldn't fix his addiction. That responsibility has to sit with the person who's got the addiction. And it only works if there's genuine willingness. If there isn't willingness, then it's a completely different story. And for some men, willingness, it isn't present. They attend a program like ours, probably or possibly because their wife has made them, or they might not realize that they've got an addiction problem. It's just something that they struggle with now and again. Thankfully, Jez was willing to change. He wanted more than anything to stop. He knew he had a problem. We just didn't know how to deal with it properly. And there was nothing available to help us walk through from where we were to where we needed to be. And with all those things in place, with all that reset program, with everything doing all the things we thought we were doing right, the weeks, months, and years went by. But because we hadn't done the deeper work, we hadn't done the spiritual work, we hadn't done the emotional connection work and the relationship, it slowly shifted. The use of the content had stopped, but we'd become more like roommates. We just got through the motions of a relationship. We'd done the work, not necessarily in the right order, or perhaps not the right work necessarily. But then life gets in the way, other things crop up, and we do what a lot of couples do, which is we just ignored the problem and we hoped it would just go away. So we swept it under the rug. And the trouble with an incomplete recovery plan and sweeping things under the rug, as we all know, it doesn't prepare you it will seep out, and it doesn't prepare you for things like relapse. So when relapse happened or happens, everything resets emotionally for both of us. All the fear, shame, guilt in Jez comes back, or in the man, it all comes back. And the original betrayal pain comes back for the woman intensely. And for me, at that stage, I withdrew completely. I found that I was just losing parts of myself. I stopped engaging. I couldn't fight it. It felt like the material was everywhere on the phones. It was so easy accessible, TV media, in anything I wanted to watch on telly. I just shut down. I couldn't understand why after such a long time it was still hurting me. He'd stopped, yet I couldn't move on, and I felt defeated. Jez was doing all the right things. We thought, the trouble was the emotional healing and the emotional connection work around safety. It hadn't been done because we didn't know it even existed. And more than anything, I was just surprised by how much the whole thing shook me. And I think most women are. And it's important to say that often at this stage, the man's work and the woman's work are very different. They don't run in parallel. One may be doing well while the other is struggling. It's certainly not linear, and it does require a lot of faith.
If you just joined me, I'm currently speaking with Jo Hewlett, and she's been sharing a deeply honest and moving story about her marriage with her husband Jez, the brokenness and the hope of restoration after the impact of pornography. One of the things you mentioned was, you mentioned quite a few things. I'm just wondering that obviously there was a turning point. And there was a moment where God intervened.
Yes.
At what point did you begin to sense like God stepping in,
yes.
clarity, comfort, and a form of direction?
Yeah, that's right. Because when we'd become Christians, just before we got married, we became Christians. We went on an Alpha course. We found God. We got baptized, got married. So faith was part of our relationship. We were learning about a relationship with God, but it was probably surface level. But when something like this happens, it isn't just like pray harder and it will go away, but faith did become something that I turned to when I didn't know what to do next, or when I couldn't control the outcome. We needed something that actually carried weight. And I think that's where faith helped, because emotions are real, but they're not reliable. And if you focus on emotions alone, then everything feels unstable. But when you anchor yourself in truth with Christ, something steadier begins to form, because faith isn't just about behavior change, it's about understanding where we've actually been rescued from and what we've been brought into. And I think for me personally, I had to rebuild my identity. I'd placed so much of who I was in my husband, his love, his choice, his faithfulness. So when that broke, it felt like I had nothing solid left. So I had to rebuild as a child of God, anchored in something that doesn't fail, not just trying to repair what was broken, but actually becoming something new at a deeper level, a different foundation internally for me. Yeah, I did still feel very alone. I spoke to God. Yes, I cried to God, but and I wish I had someone to talk to, sat next to me who understood. I know Jesus went through the ultimate betrayal, but sometimes I admit I wanted Jesus to sit with me and just hold me. And like I said, back then it wasn't a topic that was really discussed much in church. You can't really go up to your friend and say, my husband's been watching porn, very easily. And I think now that topic is starting to change a little bit, but the work, it does still need to be done. And I think alongside the realization that faith is paramount is the realization that you don't go back to the marriage that you had before. And I think that's what a lot of couples try to do. They try to just restore the marriage and you actually have to build a new one, a completely different one with completely different foundations, with new habits, new intimacy, because healing requires a lot of honest conversations, repetition, a lot of time and reassurance. And it's slow and it's uneven. But over time, with God, it does create something new and something real. So today, our marriage, it is different. I think when we use the word redemption, it can sound really neat and resolved, but in scripture, redemption, it's never sort of cheap, it's costly, it's intentional. And I think that's why rebuilding takes time and consistency, because in real life, redemption isn't pretending something didn't happen or just moving on quickly. It's the slow rebuilding of trust. And trust isn't something that the man can just ask for. It's something that has to be earned back consistently, quietly over time. And that applies particularly to the person who caused the rupture. There has to be visible, sustained change in behavior, honesty, and accountability. And on the other side, there's also this learning of how to feel safe again, of not living in that constant hypervigilance, of rebuilding your identity on something secure that hasn't been shaped by what's happened. For both sides, there's a journey of healing, and that's again where faith becomes central, because ultimately the marriage can only be built on something stronger than both people. There has to be a foundation that doesn't shift with emotions or setbacks or fear. And for us, that meant coming back to God's design for marriage, something that holds.
Well, one of the key things about redemption is that there is an option of hope
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what eventually moved you from this private restoration to public ministry, because I can imagine that must have been quite hard.
Yeah, I mean, back 10 years ago, if God had said to me then, you're going to be talking about this in 10 years, I didn't want anything to do with it. I mean, I really didn't. It does take a long time, but we realize that you don't go through something like this and just stay silent. There is more support now than there used to be, but there's still not enough, especially for couples and for churches, to help the emotional impact. And because resources, they are sometimes too clinical, or they don't hold both people in the story. Either it's for the person with the addiction or the person who feels betrayed. It's important to heal separately, yes, but there's a crucial element that involves both people so that they can reconnect in a healthy and loving way. And we didn't set out to create hope after because we had everything neatly resolved at all. We created it because we kept encountering the same message in different ways over time, that what we had walked through wasn't meant to be buried, that it was meant to be used. And scripture's actually very clear about this. God comforts us so that we can comfort others. The mercy we receive becomes something that points others back to him. And even the things that we would never have chosen, they're not wasted in his hands. And that doesn't mean, that we wanted this story. It doesn't mean that we would choose it again, but it does mean that we recognize a responsibility in it. What we needed back then was someone to walk us through and help us from where we were to somewhere more stable from which we could build. Because when everything feels overwhelming, you need that clarity. You need to know what to do first, what comes next, and what can wait. And the pathway that we've created, it takes couples through that process step by step, from the moment of discovery and stabilizing the ground after the immediate situation, to then understanding what's underneath it all, and then moving on to rebuilding trust in a way that's real and not rushed. What's really important is it holds both people with honesty. It doesn't minimize what happened. It also doesn't remove responsibility, because both trust and grace have to be present.
There may be someone listening that might be right in the middle of a storm. What would you say to the wife who's just maybe discovered something quite painful and feels
Yeah.
lost and alone?
I think if someone's listening right now and recognizing their own story in this, the first thing I'd say is that you're not alone, even though it feels like you are. The second thing I'd say is uh, don't rush the process. There can be a real pressure to fix things quickly. It's not a quick fix. There's a pressure to move on, to be okay. We tried brushing it under the rug for a number of years and we just maintain the relationship. It will seep out. And I think the other important thing to understand is that healing and rebuilding are not the same thing. You need to begin the healing individually, even before anything in the marriage can be resolved. Finally, there is hope. It's not the kind that ignores reality. It's the kind of hope that's holds steady even when everything else feels uncertain. It's hope that is built slowly and carefully and truthfully. And I know it feels like it might be the end of something when you discover you've got an addiction you can't get rid of, or you've got a husband or wife who has betrayed you in this way with pornography, and you don't know how to deal with those emotions. But it doesn't have to be the end of everything. Rebuilding requires honesty, and it requires structure and something solid to build on. And that's really what Hope After exists to support.
Yeah. Wow. What has this journey taught you about God's character that you might have not known before?
Faithful, really faithful. I mean, there are Bible verses that have, really kind of stuck out to me and helped us through this, particularly about renewal. And I think turning to his word, and I used journaling and prayer a great deal, but God's loving character and just his generosity through. God doesn't want marriages destroyed. He wants marriages to remain his thing. And yeah, I think he is faithful in that.
Wow. Gosh, I got goosebumps as you said that. That was,
Oh,
when you have those moments where you just really feel like God's presence is really in that. Yeah,
lovely.
that's beautiful. But how would you having gone through all of this, how has your marriage evolved emotionally, spiritually, and relationally since you've come through that season?
Yeah. So it requires work. Um, we take ourselves through our own program regularly because it isn't something you just kind of tick off and then it's done. It's something that requires work. So emotionally, we're much more connected. When I say we're connected in an intimate way, that's not just physically, it is emotionally. It is about learning how to communicate differently with one another to help rebuild trust. And that is how our marriage is now. Spiritually, before perhaps we didn't even take time together to pray together. Now we will spend time with God together, not just individually, but together as husband and wife. And that is really precious and something we encourage very much. And yeah, we have a really loving, well-connected relationship. So Jez does still tick all those boxes he initially ticked, but a load more as well. He is a wonderful man, and I hope that you get to meet him.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joe. If you just tune in, we've just been in conversation with Joe Hewlett, and she's shared her incredible story about just the difficulties of what her and her husband Jez have journeyed through, and the impact of pornography, but how God has been so redemptive and restored their marriage in such a beautiful way. If you want to find out more about their ministry is called Hope After, and you can find out more about all that they are doing as they help to restore other couples' marriage that have walked through something similar. Thank you so much, Joe, for joining us on Premier Christian this morning.
You are very welcome. God bless.
God bless.